We are now 6 months and about 3 days into this Trump administration. The president is touting it as some of the most successful 6 months any president has ever seen. But what do the voters think about that and his job in general? Citing chief data analyst Harry Enten is here. So the president says things are great. What do the voters say?
No, I think is the answer. 6 months in, the rules of political gravity absolutely apply to Donald Trump. And the USS Donald Trump is taking on a lot of water. What are we talking about? Trump's net approval rating. Look, he started off back in January +6 points on the net approval rating. -3 in March, -7 in May. And now he's at a term too low at -11 points. His net approval rating has dropped nearly 20 points in the aggregate since the beginning of his presidency. The American people do not like what they're seeing, and Donald Trump's administration is in a ton of trouble at this point in the minds of the American voters.
Well, on what issues do the American voters seem to disapprove of him?
They disapprove of him on all of the issues. He's underwater on all the major issues of the day. Trump's net approval rating on all the major issues, -5 points in immigration, his best issue. He's underwater. How about the economy? That was what he was elected for. -14 points. How about foreign policy? -14 points. How about trade and those tariff wars? -15 points. And of course, the Epstein case, the lowest of the bunch, -37 points, 37 points below water. My goodness gracious. On every single issue, Donald Trump is below water on all the major ones. They're all dragging him down. No matter, it seems, what Donald Trump does, the American people do not like it. And that is why at this particular point, he's at a term too low.
It's interesting because this is the issue that may be on the top of many people's minds as members of Congress head home for this extended summer recess.
And it's his worst one.
I'm not sure that House members will be excited to see that number as they leave Washington today. So where does his overall approval rating stand compared to other presidents?
Okay, I do have one piece of good news for Donald Trump, and that there is one other presidency that has a lower net approval rating at this point than this one. The bad news is that it was Donald Trump's other presidency, his first presidency, net approval rating 6 months in. The worst was in 2017. Donald Trump was 16 points underwater. The second worst, however, is this Donald Trump presidency, 11 points underwater. The average president at this point since 1953 has a +27 net approval rating. John, do some quick math with me. It seems to me that Donald Trump is about 40 points lower than the average president at this particular point. He has the second worst net approval rating at this point. He is underwater on all the major issues of the day. The bottom line is 6 months into this administration, I think that most Americans would apply the word or words disaster, terrible, awful, horrible. I think that is the way that the American people would see it at this particular point. He is so far below underwater compared to the average president. The only one he beats out is him in term number one. And I don't think that's exactly the metric he wants to be applying to himself.
Interesting to see which direction it will go next. Harry, and thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.
6 months since President Trump returned to office. He says it has been a massive success. What does the rest of the country think? My panel joins me now to discuss. Congressman Richie Torres, Democrat of New York. 6 months in, what do you think?
Well, the majority of Americans disapprove of Donald Trump. You know, he promised to end the war in Ukraine, and so far has failed. He promised to release the Epstein files, so far has failed. He said he would never touch Medicaid. He's cutting it by $1 trillion. And his economic policy has wreaked havoc on the U.S. economy. Since Donald Trump's inauguration, we've seen an 11% decline in the value of the dollar, the steepest decline in more than a half a century. And a 10 to 11% decline in the value of the dollar raises the cost of imported goods by 10%. So it's the equivalent of a $300 billion hidden Trump tax on American families and businesses. So it's been a disaster.
Former Republican Congresswoman Herrera Butler, I assume you disagree?
Well, I think that he's doing the things that they expected him to do. Whether or not they're feeling the impacts of that yet is what remains to be seen. Inflation went up last week from June, right? So these are things that are coming. Double-digit premium increases for health care. I saw in several states next year. So people will feel it, but right now, he took the chainsaw to things that they believe were broken anyway. I mean, the government's broken. This further Epstein, debacle is evidence that it's broken. So I think it's way too soon to say that they think they're unhappy with what he's doing. I think he's doing what they expected.
Let's go to the polling, if we could, in the control room there for number two. The CNN poll shows that nearly 60% of Americans disapprove of his job as president, and he is losing ground on some key issues. 42% approve, 58% disapprove. And when it comes to key issues, disapprove 60% on the economy and 58% on immigration. I'm surprised to see numbers like that on the economy and immigration. Are you?
Very much so, but I'm not surprised in the sense that if you look in the first term, when they tried to pass the first tax package, it was very unpopular then, and you saw his numbers take a hit. But then you sort of fast forward 18 months later, you saw the result of that package, and his numbers improved significantly in the economy. I think it's still too early to tell. I think for his base, a lot of it will say mission accomplished, promise made, promise kept, and he's done that. You know, DOGE, there's other factors. He's invested more in Ukraine, which is something that the base didn't want to do. But I think overall, the first 6 months, they've got to be very happy where they are, especially if they believe what took place in the first term. There was a lot of criticism with the tax package. I think it was less than 55% of people approved it, and it turned out to be the most popular thing that took place in his administration. They're banking on that same result.
I want to bring up the Epstein files because, Karen, you and I were talking offline about this, and to you, this is reminiscent of a different scandal.
And one actually you and I talked about when it happened. It is reminiscent of the scandal in the Catholic Church, because ultimately that was about an institution trying to protect itself over children who had been harmed. And we are again in a situation, it feels like, we're talking about girls who were trafficked, raped, assaulted, abused. So in this moment, the Trump administration has the opportunity to say, are you going to stand with the powerful, the men who were the clients, or are you going to protect these girls? And we've seen these young women. And so I think and I think for his base, that's part of what we were hearing this week, not just the promise made, this is a broken promise, but this sense of the powerful, once again, getting one over on people who are more vulnerable. And I'll just say, in talking about this poll, part of what I think is interesting when we look towards 2026, so if they're not able to satisfy some portion of that base, I'm not saying they'll vote for Democrats, but they may not vote for Republicans. And then across the board on the issues we've just been talking about, and I would disagree with you that what the polls have been showing consistently for months, people don't like the way he's going about what he's doing. They may say he's doing what he said, but he's actually increased support for comprehensive immigration reform among Republicans. And when these DOGE cuts hit and when these Medicaid cuts hit, those impacts people, it's only going to increase the people who are going to be, I think, looking for someone else. But Democrats have to do the work to earn the trust back in 2026.
I mean, that's the key point. In this poll, they're talking about Democrats having the lowest
Right.
favorability since polls have been taken by CNN. 28%. So all that you say could be true if Democrats could the leadership could find their backside with both hands. That's the one thing that's propping this up right now, is that they're not showing that leadership.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because there's this Democrats' 2024 autopsy that is happening, and a New York Times story says that it is described as avoiding the likeliest cause of death, as it were. The audit, which the committee is calling an after-action review, is expected to avoid the questions of whether President Biden should have run for re-election in the first place, whether he should have exited the race earlier than he did, whether Kamala Harris was the right choice to replace him. Congressman Torres, isn't that a mistake? I mean, isn't what happened with Joe Biden, his abilities, the hiding of his abilities and all that, isn't that part of the reason that your party's approval ratings are so low?
Look, we should be open and honest about the failures that led to the 2024 debacle. An autopsy should address the actual cause of death. And I felt like if the Democratic nominee, including Vice President Harris, had had the benefit of a full primary process, she would have emerged from it from a better candidate. A wise person once said, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. And I feel like we're all made better, stronger, and wiser by the rigors of a full primary process.
I think it was Nietzsche, and it was also the title.
It was Nietzsche, yes.
It's Nietzsche, and also the title
philosopher.
of Bruce Willis's second album,
I would
also,
add,
by the way.
the thing is excluding those things, it goes back to the issue of the Democratic Party and why they don't have the people's trust right now. It's a trust issue. They have no path to regain that trust. This autopsy could very much be that first step, but they say, trust us, but we're going to take the key components of why we lost out.
So actually in this story, there's three different things happening. There's the DNC one, there's two other efforts. But what I would agree with is, part of the reason we lost is we're not doing our job. We're not talking to voters. We're getting outmanned and outgunned in digital spaces. So I hope that those efforts come back and show us that, because one of the things many of us have said, you cannot show up 6 months before an election in certain communities and just expect we're just going to show up. Republicans spend off years spending money doing persuasion. We need to run a permanent campaign,
I
and
think
we're not doing it yet.
Focus on the issues of the American people. They've had enough. They don't trust institutions, covering up the whole Biden thing and not answering the question further.
What about the Epstein files? I mean, the slogan of the Trump administration is promises made,
Do
promises
it.
kept.
Do it.
He made a promise to release the files. He should keep it.
Okay. Thank you, one and all.